There's a particular silence that visits you when everything you thought you were building starts to come apart. It doesn't make noise, doesn't announce itself like a storm. It creeps in slowly. One day you just wake up and realize the things that used to bring you joy feel distant. The routines that once grounded you now feel like weight. The relationships that once energized you seem to ask more than they give. And in that silence, something starts to whisper, something so faint you almost miss it. But it's there. The question that changes everything. Is this really my life? Not the one you show to others, not the photos, not the rehearsed stories you repeat to feel like things are under control. Your actual life, the one that lives inside you when you're alone, the one that answers when you sit still enough to listen. That voice rarely speaks unless you're ready to hear it. But when it does, it cuts through all the noise. And what it often says is this: somewhere along the way, you lost yourself. You don't even know when it happened. Maybe it was gradual, like dripping water hollowing out stone. 1,000 little compromises. 100 moments when you stayed quiet to avoid conflict. When you ignored your intuition because it felt too risky. When you said yes, even though your entire being screamed no. One small surrender at a time, until you were looking in the mirror and couldn't quite remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And when that realization hits, it's not always empowering. Sometimes it feels like grief. Grieving the self you abandoned, the dreams you shelved, the parts of you that became quiet just to keep the peace. You grieve the time spent proving yourself to people who didn't know how to value you. You grieve the love you offered to those who only took. You grieve the potential that sat waiting in the background while you chased acceptance in places that never deserved your presence. But that grief, that sorrow, it's not your enemy. It's a signal. It means something sacred is waking up. Something that refused to die, even in the silence. Something within you still believes there's more to life than pretending to be okay. More than smiling through burnout. More than giving just to feel needed. Something deep inside knows that peace is not found in perfection, but in permission. The permission to begin again, to unbecome, to rebuild. That's where the real work starts. Not in changing everything overnight. Not in reinventing yourself from scratch, but in returning. In peeling away all the layers that were never truly yours. The roles, the masks, the expectations. In standing naked before your own soul and asking, what do I actually want? And for many, that's the scariest question of all, because it's easier to follow the path you know than to carve out a new one through the wilderness of uncertainty. But healing doesn't happen in the familiar. It happens in the unraveling. So you start small. You start by being honest, not to the world, but to yourself. You stop pretending that the relationship is fine. You stop telling yourself the job doesn't drain you. You stop minimizing the way certain conversations make your skin crawl. You name the things you've been avoiding, the hard truths, the quiet cries of your soul that have gone unanswered. You say them out loud even if your voice shakes, especially if your voice shakes. And what happens next isn't clarity, it's chaos. Because once you start telling the truth, everything that was built on the lie begins to tremble. Relationships shift, routines fall apart, people get uncomfortable, some leave, some stay, but become silent. And you're left with the wreckage of your former life scattered at your feet, wondering if you made a mistake. But here's what no one tells you. Breaking apart is the beginning of becoming whole. The breakdown is not the failure, it's the first honest step toward freedom. Because for the first time, you're no longer choosing what's easy, you're choosing what's real. And real has a cost. It demands that you stand alone for a while, that you sit in the discomfort of your own growth, that you feel the weight of your truth without reaching for the familiar distractions. You begin to rebuild, not with the old blueprints, but with your bare hands. You learn to be gentle with yourself. You start treating rest as sacred instead of shameful. You begin to listen to your body, not just when it breaks down, but when it whispers. You notice how your energy shifts around certain people, how your heart closes in some rooms and opens in others. You pay attention to your own rhythm. You start creating space for the things that make you feel alive, even if no one understands them. And slowly you stop asking for permission. You stop explaining why you're changing. You stop waiting for validation to make moves that feel right. You understand that not everyone will celebrate your healing. Some will resent it. Because your growth reminds them of their stagnation. Your boundaries highlight their lack of respect. Your peace disrupts their chaos. And so they may leave. Let them. Do not shrink just to be digestible to those who never had the appetite for your wholeness. You learn to sit with the silence. At first, it's uncomfortable. It echoes too loudly. It reminds you of all the things you used to run from. But in time, the silence becomes sanctuary. It becomes the space where your soul begins to breathe again, where your intuition becomes louder than your fear, where you remember who you were before the world got too loud. And in that silence, you begin to meet yourself. Not the version others wanted, not the version you curated for acceptance, but the real you. The one who laughs loudly, loves deeply, cries without apology. The one who knows their worth without performance. The one who is no longer afraid to be alone, because you've discovered that your own presence is enough. And the world around you? It shifts in response. Not because you demanded it, but because energy doesn't lie. You start attracting different conversations, different connections, people who don't flinch when you speak your truth, people who don't try to fix you when you cry, people who understand that love isn't possession, it's presence. But even then, the journey isn't linear. Some days you'll feel like you've taken 10 steps back. Old wounds reopen, old patterns resurface. You'll be tempted to return to what's familiar, even if it hurts. But now you're different. Now you notice, you pause, you question, you choose again. And in those moments, your healing deepens. You stop measuring progress by how happy you are. You start measuring it by how honest you are. How often you say no without guilt. How easily you walk away from what drains you. How gently you speak to yourself when you're in pain. You redefine success. It's no longer about how others see you, but how deeply you can sit with yourself and not want to run away. You've stopped being afraid of your darkness. You've learned to make peace with your shadows. You no longer see pain as something to avoid, but as a teacher, a mirror, a messenger. It doesn't define you, but it does refine you. And because of it, you become more compassionate, more grounded, more real. This version of you, the one rising from the ashes, isn't trying to prove anything anymore. You've burned the script. You've silenced the noise. You've chosen your truth, and that is enough. You wake up each day not to perform, but to be, to breathe, to exist in alignment with your soul. And when you meet someone now, you don't ask them what they do. You ask them what they love, what makes them cry, what lights their soul on fire, because you know now that life is too short for surface. You crave depth. You crave truth. You crave connection that doesn't require you to pretend. You've become the safe space you were always searching for. There's something sacred about being alone and actually enjoying your own company. It doesn't happen overnight. In fact, at first, it feels like punishment. The quiet is deafening. The silence amplifies everything you've tried so hard to suppress. Every doubt, every regret, every fragmented memory that once slipped beneath the noise suddenly finds its way to the surface. It doesn't ask for permission, it just shows up. And in those early stages, you want to run. You want to pick up the phone and reach out to someone, anyone, just to drown out that rising ache. But for the first time, you don't. You sit there, and it hurts, not because you're broken, but because you're detoxing. Detoxing from the chaos, from the voices that told you who to be, from the belief that your worth was tied to your usefulness, from the illusion that you needed to be everything to everyone in order to matter. You begin to shed it all, layer by painful layer, until all that remains is you, raw, unfiltered, and real. And in that rawness, something beautiful begins to bloom. Clarity. The kind of clarity you can't fake. The kind that doesn't come from thinking harder, but from feeling deeper. You begin to notice how certain habits were never truly yours, how certain goals were hand-me-downs from someone else's dreams, how so much of your energy was spent chasing things you didn't even want, just to feel like you belonged. And now, you no longer crave belonging at the expense of yourself. You crave peace, the kind of peace that isn't performative, the kind that wraps itself around you like a quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't beg for applause, the kind that says you don't need to hustle to be worthy, you already are. That realization doesn't come in grand epiphanies. It comes in the way you start moving through your day, how you begin to protect your mornings from chaos, how you stop responding to messages that carry the weight of expectation but none of the energy of love, how you start saying, "Let me get back to you," instead of, "Sure, I'll do it," when everything in you is screaming for rest. You begin to take your time back, not just in minutes or hours, but in presence. You stop rushing. You stop squeezing yourself into time slots that suffocate your soul. You no longer apologize for not being available every second, because you've realized that availability isn't love. Presence is, and you can't offer presence when you're empty. So you refill. You start nourishing your mind with silence. You give yourself permission to read slowly, to walk without a destination, to create without an outcome. You stop multitasking your life into fragments and begin living it in wholeness. You light candles just because. You play music that matches your mood instead of changing it. You cry when it hits you. You laugh when it surprises you. And none of it is for show. This is your life now, not curated, not polished, but true. And in that truth, you find your voice again, the one that got lost in the noise, the one that used to whisper dreams before they were dismissed, the one that dared to want more before the world said it was too much. You listen, not with urgency, with reverence. And your voice says, you are allowed to choose differently now. So you do. You choose softness in a world that values sharp edges. You choose honesty in conversations that once demanded convenience. You choose rest when everyone else is sprinting. You choose joy, not the loud kind, but the kind that sneaks up on you when you're folding laundry and your favorite song plays in the background. And joy? You realize you don't have to earn it. You don't have to complete the checklist. You don't have to prove you've suffered enough to deserve a good moment. Joy is your birthright. Peace is your baseline. Not because life is easy, but because you've made a choice, a sacred, intentional choice, to stop abandoning yourself every time someone else has a need. You become fiercely protective of your healing. You no longer share it in places where it will be questioned or mocked. You no longer offer your story to people who only want it for entertainment. You keep it close, like a flame in the wind. You don't hide it, but you shelter it, because it's still growing, still learning, still becoming. And becoming is messy. Becoming is letting go of old identities without knowing what comes next. It's standing in the hallway between who you were and who you're becoming. It's uncomfortable, it's terrifying, and it's holy. You start noticing the signs, not the big cinematic moments, the subtle ones. How your stomach clenches before a conversation that no longer feels safe. how your heart opens when someone truly listens, how you no longer chase connections that demand you be someone else, how your solitude no longer feels like a waiting room, but a sanctuary. You no longer see healing as a destination. You stop trying to arrive. You begin to dance with the process, to flow with it, to laugh at the days you mess up, to forgive the moments you snap, to soften every time you forget and remember again. Because now you know, healing is not a ladder, it's a spiral, and spirals bring you back again and again, not to punish you, to deepen you. Each time you return, you're different, softer, wiser, stronger. So when the old wounds whisper again, you don't panic. You don't shove them away. You hold them. You listen. You say, I hear you, but we're safe now. You parent yourself the way no one ever did, with tenderness, with presence, with patience. And slowly those wounds start to loosen their grip. They don't vanish. They integrate. They teach you how to move with grace, how to walk into rooms with your scars showing and not flinch, how to speak your truth even when your voice is trembling, how to live without needing to be fixed. You stop looking for perfection in yourself or others. You stop needing guarantees. You stop demanding certainty. You learn to live in the gray, in the questions, in the in-between. And that's where real life happens. Not in the finished product, but in the making. Not in the performance, but in the presence. Not in the arrival, but in the return. You return to yourself again and again. And each time, you find something new waiting, something beautiful, something true. There comes a day when you wake up and everything feels different, not because the world has changed, but because you have. It's not a dramatic moment. It's not the kind of day people write movies about. It's subtle, almost silent, but it's real. You notice it in the way you no longer feel the need to respond to that message right away, in the way your chest doesn't tighten when someone withdraws, in the way you no longer force conversations that feel forced. You don't announce it, but something inside you knows. You've shifted. You've begun living for yourself again. And this doesn't mean you become selfish. It means you finally understood the cost of living for everyone else. You remember the way it felt to constantly scan the room, anticipating needs that were never yours to carry. You remember answering texts you didn't have the energy for, just to keep the peace. You remember how you performed joy to make others comfortable while quietly breaking inside. Now, you don't do that anymore. Now you give yourself permission to disappoint people. You let them be uncomfortable. You let them question your distance. You let them misunderstand you because you've stopped editing yourself to fit into a narrative that was never meant for you. And in doing so, you've reclaimed your power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that anchors. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It shows up in the way you sit with your own silence, the way you make space for your pain without drowning in it, the way you choose your response instead of reacting from your wounds. This kind of power is quiet but unshakable. It doesn't seek validation because it's rooted in truth. It doesn't seek revenge because it's too busy creating peace. You look at your past differently now, not as a series of mistakes, but as a map. Each scar, each heartbreak, each regret, they all led you here. You no longer cringe when you remember the things you once tolerated. You honor them because they were lessons, necessary ones. They taught you about your capacity to endure. But more importantly, they taught you that endurance isn't the same as alignment. You're no longer impressed by your ability to hold pain. You're more interested in your capacity to release it. So you release. You release the need to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You release the guilt that creeps in when you say no. You release the shame you've carried from not being who others expected you to be. You stop apologizing for changing. You stop apologizing for evolving. You stop apologizing for saving yourself. And in that release, you make space. Space for softness, for joy, for stillness. You start decorating your life with moments that don't need to be posted to be real. You dance while cooking. You take long showers with music playing. You sit by the window just to watch the light change. You return to the small things that remind you you're alive. You stop rushing. You stop chasing. You stop clinging. Instead, you allow. You allow people to come and go without turning their exit into your failure. You allow endings to be sacred instead of shameful. You allow the unknown to stretch before you without trying to control every outcome. You let life happen, not as a punishment, but as a process. And you stop needing to be somewhere other than where you are. Presence becomes your practice, not because it's easy, but because it's true. You start saying yes to what nourishes you. Yes to conversations that leave you feeling seen. Yes to time alone without distraction. Yes to friendships that honor your silence. Yes to paths that don't look like everyone else's but feel like home. You no longer take every invitation. You no longer accept every opinion. You no longer welcome every energy. You are intentional now, not guarded, just aware. You know what it took to rebuild yourself. You know the nights you cried into your pillow, praying for peace. You know the mornings you pulled yourself out of bed with hands shaking. You know the strength it took to forgive people who never said sorry. You know the courage it took to love yourself in moments when you felt utterly unlovable. And because of that, you protect your healing like the sacred ground it is. You don't open up to just anyone anymore. You no longer bleed in front of those who watch for entertainment. You no longer seek intimacy in people who fear depth. You stop giving your energy to conversations that go nowhere. You stop pouring yourself out just to feel worthy. Because you are worthy, in your silence, in your solitude, in your softness. You've stopped needing to be everything. You've stopped trying to hold all the pieces together. You've stopped defining your worth by your productivity. You've started asking yourself better questions. Does this feel good in my body? Does this align with who I'm becoming? Does this choice honor my future self? And when the answer is no, you walk away. You walk away without burning bridges, but you don't leave a trail back either. Not because you're cruel, but because you're clear. Clarity becomes your currency. And clarity changes how you show up in the world. You no longer react from fear. You no longer chase what leaves. You no longer force what resists. You move with intention, with grace, with love that no longer seeks to fix, but simply to be. You've begun building a life that matches your soul, not your wounds. And maybe it's quieter than before. Maybe fewer people understand it. But it's yours, every inch of it. Crafted not for approval, but for alignment. You've chosen depth over noise, truth over comfort, wholeness over perfection. And in that choice, you've finally come home, to yourself. You reach a moment where the world around you no longer dictates the temperature of your soul. You've spent so much of your life adjusting, adapting to the rooms you walk into, molding your voice to sound softer, folding your desires so they don't take up too much space. And now, as you walk forward on this new path of becoming, you're no longer interested in being adjustable. You want to be real. You want to be seen, not for the version you carefully crafted, but for the one who was buried beneath all the pleasing, all the pretending, all the enduring. And you understand now, authenticity isn't loud. It's not about screaming who you are into every conversation. It's about how you move. It's about how your energy shifts when you stop performing, how your breath slows when you stop lying to yourself. It's in the way you hold your truth without asking for permission, in the way you let someone walk away rather than beg them to stay in a version of you that no longer exists. You realize that healing doesn't mean fixing everything. It means no longer pretending that everything is fine when it's not. It means holding yourself with grace through your messiness. It means sitting in your truth, even when it trembles. It means loving yourself while you're still healing, still unsure, still in between. Because this in-between space, it's sacred. It's where the old you has been shed, but the new you hasn't fully arrived. It's awkward, uncomfortable, sometimes painful, but it's real. And it's where the most honest parts of your transformation begin. Not in arrival, but in surrender. You surrender to the not knowing. You stop forcing answers that aren't ready to be spoken. You stop grasping for people who cannot meet you where you are. You stop expecting clarity from chaos. And instead you listen to your body, to your spirit, to that quiet knowing that says, we're getting there, just not today. And in that slowing, you begin to notice things you missed before. The way your body softens around safety, the way certain songs now carry more weight, the way your silence becomes filled with meaning. You start to feel life again, not just exist in it. You notice how different the sun feels on your skin when you're no longer rushing through everything, how food tastes richer, how sleep finally feels restful, because your nervous system isn't always bracing for the next impact. You don't fear rest anymore. You don't see it as laziness. You see it as devotion, devotion to your well-being, devotion to your peace, devotion to a life that doesn't just look good from the outside, but feels whole on the inside. And people may not understand that. Let them misunderstand. You're no longer here to be explained. You're here to be, to breathe, to walk in alignment with your truth, even if it's quiet, especially then. And you learn that peace doesn't always look like calm waters. Sometimes it looks like storms you didn't avoid, conversations you didn't run from, boundaries you set and upheld even when your voice shook. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of clarity in the midst of it. It's choosing not to betray yourself for the comfort of others. That means saying no when your whole body says no. It means leaving the table when respect is no longer being served. It means letting go of relationships that rely on your silence to survive. It means standing in your own wholeness, even if no one else claps for it. You begin to trust yourself more deeply. You no longer ask a dozen people for their opinion before making a move. You check in with yourself first. You ask, does this align with who I'm becoming? And if it doesn't, you don't force it. Even if it once brought joy, even if others don't get it, because you're not living for their applause. You're living for your own peace. You stop proving, stop explaining, stop contorting yourself into something more digestible. You allow yourself to be seen fully in your tenderness, in your strength, in your stillness. And the people who can't meet you there, you bless them and let them go, without guilt, without resentment, just clarity. Because not everyone is meant to stay. Not everyone is ready to meet you in your fullness. Some people only know how to love fragments. Some only know how to meet the version of you that bled to keep them comfortable. And that version of you? She's gone now. Not in bitterness, but in rebirth. You've been reborn, not as someone new, but as someone more whole. You laugh louder now, cry easier, breathe deeper. You live more slowly, more intentionally, more rooted in your own body. You don't rush the process, you trust it. You no longer seek destinations. You create rituals, tiny anchors of joy and presence that bring you home to yourself again and again. And in doing so, you stop searching for home in other people. You stop asking others to complete you. You stop giving your power away to people who wouldn't know what to do with it. You've realized that being loved by someone else is beautiful, but it will never compare to the day you finally learned how to love yourself. Truly, radically, unconditionally. The kind of love that doesn't flinch when you make mistakes, that doesn't disappear when you're not performing, that doesn't punish you for needing space, or rest or solitude. The kind of love that stands with you on your hardest days and says, even now, especially now, I am here. That love is yours now. You carry it with you. You speak it to yourself when no one else is around. And that voice, it's kind, it's steady. It no longer sounds like your critics. It no longer mimics your past. It sounds like you, healed, whole, enough. And maybe the world still doesn't understand. Maybe the people around you still look at your quiet and call it cold. Still look at your solitude and call it sadness. Still look at your boundaries and call them walls. But you know better. You've stopped explaining joy to those who thrive in noise. You've stopped translating peace into languages not meant for your soul. You've stopped shrinking your experience so others feel tall. You are here now, fully, unapologetically, finally, and in that here-ness, you have found something you've spent your whole life chasing. You've found home somewhere between holding everything together and learning to let go. You realize that real strength was never about keeping up appearances. It wasn't about pretending that you were fine when you weren't. It wasn't about showing up with a smile when you were quietly breaking. Strength, you've come to understand, is more honest than that. It's found in the way you admit you're tired, in the way you stop running from yourself, in the way you soften, even when life tries to harden you. There's a quiet dignity in saying, this hurts. There's courage in saying, I need space. There's wisdom in choosing rest over rage, grace over bitterness, distance over dysfunction. It's not about being unaffected. It's about being deeply affected and still choosing peace. You remember the times you didn't. You remember holding it all in until your chest ached. You remember giving just a little more when you already had nothing left. You remember hoping that if you loved harder, they'd finally see you. That if you tried just one more time, things would change. But what changed wasn't the situation. It was you. You stopped trying to force healing in places that were committed to pain. You stopped trying to make people stay who were already halfway out the door. You stopped offering your light to those who kept you in the shadows. And that choice didn't come easy. It came with tears, with shaking hands, with sleepless nights. But it came, and it freed you. Because now you know, you don't have to earn your right to be seen. You don't have to hustle to be loved. You don't have to twist yourself into pieces to be chosen. The people who are meant to be with you will not require your self-betrayal. They won't make you question your worth. They won't ask you to dim your brilliance so they can shine. So you rise, not with vengeance, with clarity, with softness, with truth. You rise by choosing joy even when the world is heavy. You rise by showing up for yourself in small, sacred ways, drinking enough water, taking deep breaths, turning off your phone, lighting a candle, journaling your grief, honoring your joy. You rise by becoming your own sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, you start to feel safe again, safe in your own skin, safe in your own presence, safe in the stillness you once ran from. Because the truth is, you were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who were too afraid to love fully. You were never too emotional. Your depth simply made shallow hearts uncomfortable. You were never too sensitive. Your empathy only highlighted what others refused to feel. So now, you don't apologize for your light. You don't downplay your magic. You don't beg for crumbs of connection. You feed yourself now with your own words, your own love, your own validation. You become the source. You become the source of your calm, the source of your confidence, the source of your joy. You stop outsourcing your wholeness, because when you gave others the power to complete you, they also had the power to break you. And now you've reclaimed that power. You've brought it back home, to your own hands, to your own heart, and it feels like coming back to life. You walk through your days with more intention now. You no longer say yes out of obligation. You no longer attend events just to be seen. You no longer post for attention. You live quietly, fully, authentically. You let your energy speak for you. You let your boundaries teach others how to treat you. And when they don't listen, you don't fight. You don't explain. You don't try to make them understand. You simply leave, not with noise, with grace. Because you've realized that not all endings are tragedies. Some are triumphs. Some are you finally choosing yourself. Some are doors closing so your hands are free to open new ones. You've become more selective, not from fear, from wisdom. You don't need 1,000 friends. You need a few real ones. The ones who see you when you're quiet, who stay when you're messy, who love you when you're low. The ones who don't just take from your light, but who remind you of it when you forget. You learn to pour with intention, to give with discernment, to love without losing yourself. And when the loneliness creeps in, as it sometimes does, you meet it with tenderness. You no longer see it as a sign that something is wrong. You see it as space, as an invitation to deepen your connection with yourself. You light a candle, you write, you walk, you breathe. You remember that solitude is not the same as isolation. Solitude is your soul asking for your attention, and you give it willingly, because you're no longer afraid of your own company. You've made peace with your thoughts. You've stopped believing every story your mind tells you. You've started asking, is this true? Is this kind? Is this mine? And in asking, you've softened. You've begun releasing the narratives that never belonged to you, the ones that said you had to earn love, that you had to prove your worth, that you had to suffer to be significant. You've replaced them with truths. I am enough. I am worthy. I am whole. Even when I'm growing, even when I'm grieving, even when I'm healing, especially then. And this isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real, raw, honest, present. It's about showing up in your own life, not as an act, but as yourself. You don't have to do everything right. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to stay, to keep walking, to keep loving, to keep choosing the life that aligns with your soul, even when it's hard, because you've seen what happens when you don't. You've lived that story, and now you're writing a new one. It happens slowly, like dawn. The sky doesn't shout its arrival. It simply begins to change. And you, after months or maybe even years of feeling lost in the noise of your own life, begin to notice something shift. It's not that everything is perfect now. It's not that the pain has vanished. It's that you've grown so deeply rooted in yourself that the storms no longer unearth you. You feel it in the way you wake up, not in a rush, not in a panic, but with a kind of sacred stillness that whispers, "You're safe here." You don't check your phone first thing. You don't scramble to meet a version of success that was never yours. You lie there for a moment, letting your breath sink with the morning. And in that moment, you know, you're finally building a life that feels like your own. You begin to understand that healing isn't something that arrives all at once. It's not an event. It's a way of moving, a way of seeing. It's a quiet choice you make again and again, especially on the days when you're tempted to slip back into your old patterns. You catch yourself before you say yes when you mean no. You pause before reaching for your phone to fill the silence. You sit in your discomfort instead of fleeing from it. And in those tiny decisions, you feel your power return. Not because you've conquered the darkness, but because you've befriended it. You've stopped waging war on your own soul. You've started listening to the parts of you that used to be silenced, and they in turn have begun to trust you again. You're no longer interested in being impressive. You've lived that life. You know what it's like to be praised for your productivity while quietly unraveling inside. You know what it's like to be admired for your strength while wondering if anyone sees how much it's costing you. You're done with that now. You don't need to perform your healing. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to be the most resilient person in the room. You just want to be real, present, whole. And you're starting to understand that wholeness doesn't mean having it all together. It means honoring all the parts of yourself, even the ones you used to hide, especially those. You begin to find joy in the most unexpected places, in the way sunlight filters through the curtains, in the way your tea steams in the mug between your hands, in the silence that used to feel like loneliness, but now feels like love. You stop chasing highs. You start sinking into depth. You realize that presence is the purest form of pleasure, and you start designing your life around that. You don't fill every moment with noise. You don't pack your schedule just to avoid yourself. You leave room, and nothing, not loss, not rejection, not even the echoes of your past, can take that away. There are days now when you catch yourself smiling for no particular reason, days when the air feels lighter and your chest no longer holds that familiar tightness. You find yourself doing the simplest things, pouring a cup of tea, folding laundry, walking without purpose, and yet they feel like rituals, holy, sacred. You aren't rushing anymore. You aren't fighting time like it's an enemy. You aren't pushing yourself to be anywhere but here. And in that here-ness, something has quietly settled, something steady, something you once thought you had to earn, but now know you simply had to return to: peace. You didn't get here through shortcuts. You didn't buy your way into this feeling or distract your pain into silence. You faced it. You walked through it. You sat with the ache when it would have been easier to run. And there were moments, long and weary, when you questioned whether you'd make it. Nights when the silence in your room echoed louder than any crowd ever could. Mornings when your own reflection felt unfamiliar, like a stranger staring back at you, asking what happened. You wanted answers. You wanted something to hold on to. But the answers never came wrapped in clarity. They came in surrender, in softening, in letting yourself unravel, thread by thread, without rushing to sew it all back together. And now here you are, not fixed, not finished, but full of truth, of presence, of something real that cannot be faked. You're no longer interested in being understood by everyone. You've outgrown the need to explain your every move, your every boundary, your every change. People will try to categorize you. They'll call you distant when you protect your energy. They'll call you difficult when you stop saying yes to what drains you. They'll call you selfish when you start choosing yourself. Let them. You're no longer carrying their projections. You're no longer dimming yourself so someone else can feel comfortable in your presence. That version of you, the one who contorted herself into something convenient for others, is gone. Not with bitterness, with love, with the kind of love that says, I choose me now, even if you don't. It doesn't mean you've stopped loving others. If anything, you love more deeply now, but differently. You love from wholeness, not hunger. You love from presence, not pressure. You don't chase. You don't convince. You don't overgive as a way of proving your worth. You've stopped performing love. You've started living it. And love in its purest form asks nothing but truth. Not perfection, not performance, just presence, just honesty. And you're finally honest with yourself, with others, with life. You've learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're invitations. They say, if you want to be in my life, here's how to do it in a way that honors both of us. And the people who truly see you, who truly love you, will not flinch at that clarity. They will meet you there, not because you demanded it, but because their love doesn't require you to bleed. They won't ask you to explain why your heart beats differently now. They'll just be grateful to hear it beat. And when someone doesn't meet you there, you let them go. Not out of anger, out of integrity. You no longer hold on to what no longer holds you. You no longer beg for what your soul has already released. You finally understood that letting go is not failure, it's freedom. The kind of freedom that says, I honor your path, but I refuse to lose myself to walk beside you. You bless what was. You grieve what could have been. And then you turn forward, not because it's easy, but because it's true. This turning forward isn't always glamorous. It's not some cinematic montage of success and sunrise moments. Often, it looks like quiet mornings and hard conversations with yourself. It looks like deleting messages you'll never send, sitting with emotions that make your hands shake, resisting the urge to run back to something just because it's familiar. But each time you choose yourself, even in the smallest way, you plant a seed of trust, a seed of wholeness, a seed of becoming. And those seeds, they grow, slowly, quietly, steadily, until one day you realize you've built a garden inside yourself, one where joy can bloom, one where peace is not borrowed, but your own. And in that garden, you find parts of yourself you thought you lost, the curiosity, the softness, the creativity, the parts that used to come alive before life made you doubt them. You begin to write again, sing again, dance without needing rhythm or audience. You begin to speak without filtering your truth. You laugh without checking if it's too loud. You move without wondering if you're too much, because you know now you were never too much. You were just too alive for people who had forgotten how to feel. You no longer measure your growth by what you produce.